Keep Our Republic is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Since the spring of 2020, we've been doing our part to help keep our republic. We do it through hyper-localized civic education. We talk with Americans through town halls, through legal seminars, media briefings, and other events. We know a lot of Americans have a lot of questions about how our elections work, what safeguards are in place, and who actually is working behind the scenes on election night as the votes are being tabulated. And that's why we're really glad you're joining us today. Hopefully, we can answer some of those questions. Thad Hall, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Now, tell our audience a little about you and a little about Mercer County, Pennsylvania.
Sure. So I'm the election director here in Mercer County. I've been here since August of 2020. And prior to that, I was an election director in Coconino County, Arizona, which is where the Grand Canyon is. It's the second largest county in the country. And then before that, I was a deputy director and interim director of the election office in Richland County, South Carolina, which is where Columbia, South Carolina is located. And before that, I did consulting work and academic work on elections, all starting back in 2000 with the 2000 Bush versus Gore election issues. So I've been doing this a long time.
I would definitely like to unpackage that. So
Sure.
Pennsylvania's losing population, or at least is not growing in population. Arizona's the
Right.
opposite. So it's always
Right.
exciting to hear someone doing the reverse, moving, and
Sure.
then for that matter, moving to a fairly rural part of Pennsylvania and during a
Right.
global pandemic.
Exactly. So, well, one of the reasons why I moved to I'm sorry, one of the reasons why I moved to Mercer County was because I wanted to be closer to my family. I have a son who lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, but also, being in northern Arizona it's a pretty remote place. People don't realize how far you are from civilization when you're up near the Grand Canyon. It's Flagstaff is a nice city, but it's a very expensive area, and so I really like northwestern Pennsylvania a lot. It's a very nice place to live. It's very relaxed, very low key, and we don't have natural disasters, which is also kind of nice. So it's a great place to live.
Tell the audience a little about Mercer County. As I alluded to, it's fairly rural. It's in the northwest corner of
Sure.
Pennsylvania. As you alluded to, it's on the Ohio border, but
Right. Yeah. So Mercer County is a county. We have 75,000 registered voters. So it's not a large county, but it's not super small either for Pennsylvania. We're the 36th smallest county, so there are 67 counties. So we're right there at the median size of the counties in the state. Half the county is very agricultural, rural, and half of the county is where a population center is that has about 40 to 50,000 people. And so the county kind of has a mixture of everything. It has, an urban component, and it also has a very agricultural component as well. And then in the far south part of our county, we also have people who commute into Pittsburgh, which is about an hour away. So we're kind of nicely situated. We're, 20 minutes from Youngstown, Ohio. We're 75 minutes to Cleveland, and we're 60 minutes to Pittsburgh. So, we are in a rural area, but we're surrounded by lots of stuff, which is nice.
and I'd encourage the audience to check out the Grand Canyon of Pennsylvania, which is
Yeah.
relatively close to you, but certainly a little bit greener and different than the Grand Canyon that you referenced in Arizona.
Yeah, we had a polling place at the bottom of the Grand Canyon in Arizona. It was pretty interesting. So you had to fly down on a helicopter, which I got to do once, which was
So how this is such important work, but so many Americans have so many questions about it. How some time ago, it sounds like you decided that this is going to be your life's career.
right. So I worked in academia, and then I decided I wanted to actually work in the administration of elections. I had studied how elections are administered, but I wanted to actually work in it. And I had friends who were election directors, and so I started working in South Carolina right before the 2018 midterm elections, and that's how I got started in actually administering elections. And I learned a lot in a very quick period of time. and then was able to become a director. And, since then have been um, running elections. And I really like the size of Mercer County and Coconino County. They both have fewer than 100,000 registered voters, which means that as the director, I actually get to interact with our precinct workers, our poll workers. I get to work with the political parties and the candidates pretty fairly directly. Whereas if you were in a bigger city like in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh, you're really managing a lot of people who then get to run the elections. And in a jurisdiction my size, if you're in a jurisdiction that has between like 150,000 and fewer voters, you actually get to run the elections and go out to the polling places and do all the work that actually makes the job fun.
How many polling places do you have, by the way?
We have at the moment we have 91. We're in the process of consolidating some precincts, but currently we have 91 across the county. And so that's a pretty, it's the big issue for us is we in Pennsylvania you're required to have a polling place in every township and borough and city. And so we have lots of municipalities, so we're already kind of cursed to have lots of polling places. And the nice thing here is we also don't have a lot of very big polling places. There are cities where they have 4,000 or 5,000 voters going into one polling place, and we try to limit our polling places to have 1,200 or fewer voters, which makes it easier for us to provide more personalized service from our poll workers to our voters, which is important. Makes people happier.
So take folks back a solid 5 years, feels like five decades. You arrive,
Sure.
global pandemic's
Right.
happening. Pennsylvania is
Sure.
probably as ground zero as can be for
Mhm.
politics.
Right.
What was the biggest surprise as you look at the nuances and the systems and processes and safeguards that Pennsylvania has that some of the jurisdictions you worked in didn't?
Sure. So I think one of the things that differentiates states is just the quality of their election laws. Um, and Pennsylvania has a very old election code. It hasn't been updated in a long time. And so there are parts of the code that date back to 1891, because I have the 1891 code in my office and I can refer to it and realize that this stuff has not been updated. And so,
Yeah, the
one of
first
the
time you
issues here
met,
is there's just,
we met, you shared it with me, and there's just
yeah,
something really unique about seeing an old book with the yellow pages and
right.
the special type of font. Yeah.
And it's literally dates back to 1891. And, we have a very old election code. We have a very old set of processes. The code doesn't get updated very much. And so it does create a very interesting dynamic. And the state is also not, well, when I arrived, they were not very technologically um, cutting edge. So for instance, when I was in Arizona, we had, and even when I was in South Carolina, we had electronic poll books to check in voters. And electronic poll books are only now coming into fashion here in Pennsylvania. And so it's just interesting how far behind we are in many respects
And just
compared
remind the
to other
audience,
states.
is that a county to county decision, or that's a Commonwealth-wide
Um,
budgetary?
well, it's interesting. So when I was in South Carolina, the state did all of the purchasing of poll books and voting equipment. Here, it's a county by county decision. It was a county by county decision when I was in Arizona as well. And so, yeah, so here in Pennsylvania, it's being adopted county by county, the electronic poll books. Counties are paying for it out of their own funds. But it'll be interesting to see if moving forward, there is an effort to have poll books statewide, with counties having the choice of what brand to use, but being able to have poll books in every precinct to make sure that, and there are reasons to want to do that. One of them is that it makes it easier to check in voters, but it also makes sure that your data is more correct because people tend to make fewer errors when they check in people electronically versus writing in a poll book.
Just as a corollary, what machines is Mercer County using?
Sure, we use so people in Mercer County vote on a paper optical scan ballot, and then that ballot is put through a scanner, and a company called Election Systems and Software makes our scanners, and they also make our. Every county in the country has to have a piece of accessible equipment that can be used by people who are blind and or have like a physical disability. and that equipment is also sold to us by ES&S. So they're the brand that we use. Most counties in Western Pennsylvania use ES&S equipment. There's a small number of counties that use equipment by Dominion.
So before we plunge a little bit deeper, just
Sure.
also remind the audience, Pennsylvania county government largely has three elected commissioners. You're then a full-time county
Right.
employee, not running for election. Maybe speak a little to those dynamics.
Oh, sure. So in every state, they have a different way of like having an administrative structure for elections. So in Pennsylvania, we have a Secretary of the Commonwealth. That person is appointed by the governor. So we don't have an elected Secretary of State, which is what you see in many other states. And then at the county level, our county commissioners are also our election board. And so, for instance, when I was in South Carolina, we had an independent election board that was appointed by members of the General Assembly from our county. And then when I was in Arizona, our elections were run by the board of commissioners in the county. And so our board was the people who ran our elections was basically our board of supervisors. And so here we have county commissioners, and those people are ultimately in charge of our elections. And then we have a manager, me, who's the election director, and I do all the managerial work. Yeah, so that's how it works.
Do you have a team, or are you a department of one?
I did no. We have a team. We have I have four employees and me. So like I said, we have 67 counties. I'm the 36th smallest one. So there are 35 counties bigger than mine. In the counties that are smaller than me, the typical size of an election office is 2 people or 1 person. And so, for instance, the county north of me, where Meadville is, which is it's a little university town. Crawford County, they are actually the median-sized county, and they have 2 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff. And then as you get smaller than that, those counties will have some of the smallest counties. They have just 1 employee. They have the election director, who is also every other role in the office. They program the equipment. They process all the voter registrations. They process all the mail ballot requests. So those people, they're doing every job that there is. And so it's much easier. So in my office, it's actually a lot easier because I do have enough staff to cover all of the general activities that we have. So with voter registration and that.
Well, let's talk a little about mail ballots.
Sure.
It was not necessarily a concept or a paradigm in Pennsylvania before 2020. I suppose it was a
Right.
trickle in your county, but
Right.
I'd be curious. I'm sure audience would be curious. Post 2020, most recent election in 2024, even the primary of 2025. I mean, is there a trend line with mail ballots?
Sure. So one of the things that we're seeing is the political parties choose strategies for how they want to get people to vote. And so obviously most people in Pennsylvania, they vote on election day. So even this past election in 2024, where we had a lot of people who voted prior to election day, we still had 75 to 80% of our voters voting at the polls on election day. In 2020, the idea was in 2019 that they were going to introduce no excuse mail voting. And the idea is that there would be some sort of uptick in mail ballot usage. We had about 4%, 5% of people voting by mail prior to 2020. And so the idea it'll go up to 10% or something like that. And then it'll slowly ramp up. And then we have the pandemic. And so we went from 0 to 100 very quickly. So we went from having, 3 or 4%, 5% of people voting by mail to in 2020, 23% of my ballots were by mail voters. And then what we've seen since then is in 2024, we had the same number of people vote by mail, but in Pennsylvania, we do not have early voting. So in a state like Texas or in Maryland, they have early voting sites where you can go to any of the designated early voting sites in your county. and you can cast a vote in person prior to election day where your ballot goes into a ballot box. So you're being checked in just like you are at the polls. You're being given a ballot just like at the polls. You're voting that ballot, and then you're putting it into a scanner just like at the polls. In Pennsylvania, we do not have that. And what we have is what's called over-the-counter voting, where you come in, you fill out an application for a mail ballot just like you would to get a ballot by mail, and then you're handing it to us over our counter in our office, and we're giving you a ballot and the envelope that it goes in. So we're giving you all the components to cast a by mail ballot. You're voting that ballot in my office, you're putting it into the envelope, and then you're putting it into a ballot box, but it's not going to be counted until election day. And so those ballots cannot be canvassed, which basically means opened and put through a tabulation machine until election day. The issue we have is that's a very cumbersome process in Pennsylvania, in part because we have a voter registration system that's literally 21 years old. So the technology that is being used in that system is 21 years old. And so the process of checking in a voter and then giving them a ballot, just that process of the check-in and printing a label for the voter and getting them their ballot can take up to 15 minutes because of the checks that have to go into making sure that the voter is the correct voter and all of that, and they're eligible to vote by mail. And so, we end up with these very long lines in our office. And so we have this mismatch between the strategies the parties want to use, which is to get people to vote prior to election day so they can bank those votes. So I know that, if I'm a Republican or, I want to know that, a certain number of people have already voted prior to election day, because then I don't have to mobilize them on election day. Democrats are doing the same thing. And, we're expecting in 2026 and 2028, unless we get true early voting, that this will be more and more of a problem, because I can train a poll worker. Well, I've already trained poll workers to check people in on election day. So early voting, in-person early voting is simple because I hire poll workers and they open up a big polling place for me, and all they have to know is how to print ballots. Okay, that's the only thing they have to do is print ballots and make sure to get people the right ballot. With over-the-counter voting, you have to process it through the state's voter registration system. And that requires specialized skills and knowledge. And in smaller counties, so in basically the 40 smallest counties, it's really hard to train people up to be able to do that, because we're talking about people who can work every day for 3 weeks, and they, have to be here all day. And so, it's hard to train people up to do that because our poll workers tend to be older. They're people who are retired, who have time off, and it's hard to find people who can do this otherwise. I actually lived in Utah for a while, and they had the unique advantage of having the Mormon population was actually really awesome because they had lots of people who were very well educated, who were stay-at-home moms or in a little bit rarer cases, stay-at-home dads, and those people you can actually get to work as poll workers. And so Utah has this really nice population of people to pull from. But here in Pennsylvania, people who are of that same working age, between basically 35 and 55, here they're working. Everybody's working, and so it's hard to find people who have the time to spend to be those poll workers that we can train to do over-the-counter voting. That was a very long answer to
No, I was excited to sit down with that for a variety of reasons, but I think the audience should know you've taken a real leadership role statewide because you do have such incredible, insightful perspective on this. So I do want to unpackage that a bit.
Sure.
Just on the last point, if I
Mhm.
understood you, you have about 90 or so polling precincts around Mercer County?
Right. I have 91. Yes.
Not, yeah. So then what would you say is the average age of your election day poll workers?
I would say that it varies based on the part of the county we're in. So in the more rural parts of the county, they tend to be older. They tend to be more retired. I have an urban area where I do get workers who are more in their 40s and 50s. and early 60s. And so you do see this variation across the county.
All right, well, let's. So you alluded to in 2019, the Pennsylvania General Assembly did have, I would argue, much overdue, fairly comprehensive legislation around election
Mhm.
administration. Um,
Mhm.
but this is only the beginning, is what I'm hearing, and I think what the audience is hearing. So, if you had a magic wand, and perhaps we have audience members in Harrisburg, what should the legislature? Because this really would take an act of the legislature. What to modernize that fairly archaic Pennsylvania code would be top of mind for you.
Sure. So actually was fortunate enough to have a conversation with um, the staff of one of the legislative committees recently, and I made it 3 points to them. One is that we do need to create um, a process for having true early voting, where people could vote prior to election day at a polling place. And I pointed them to the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland has very clear um, guidelines for how to conduct early voting. So, for instance, they have an 8-day period where you can vote early. It doesn't end on election day, like the day before the election. It ends on the third. It ends on a Thursday prior. Um, I pointed out to them that there are limits on how many polling places each county can have. It's basically designed so that you have a polling place for every 100,000 voters. So you don't end up in a situation where two counties of the same size um, have wildly different numbers of polling locations. And it has a very clear process of what days they're open, what days they're not open, what their hours are. And so I pointed them to that because I think what we need in Pennsylvania is a very structured law for how to do true early voting. And then secondly, we need to make some small changes to the process of pre-canvassing, which is when we are allowed to open up the mail-in ballots and then scan them. We had a really good process for that in Arizona where we could open the ballots ahead of time, but counties generally didn't scan the ballots until the Friday, Saturday, or Monday prior to election day because we had to live stream the process of scanning. And so people didn't want to have these live streams open all the time. So there was a very narrow period where people actually scanned ballots. And so doing something like that would be really helpful where we could open the ballots ahead of time. It actually is helpful for counting the ballots because once they're flattened out and out of the envelope, they actually flatten themselves. And so it makes them easier to scan. And it also, one of the issues we have with pre-canvassing today is that it pulls resources away from election day voting. So if I have to have, like I had probably 35 people here on election day helping us open ballots and scan them and all of that. Those are resources that I should be using to support my election day operations. And so one of the nice things about pre-canvassing is that it would let me push more resources into supporting election day voting. And the third thing, I talked to them about was just updating that we have aspects of our voter registration law that are very old. So for instance, I can only cancel a voter who dies if I have a copy of a printed from the newspaper obituary, or if I have a report from the Department of Health. So if I have an online obituary from somewhere, I can't use that. I can't use a letter from another state. I can't use public health records from another state. There's all sorts of. I can't even use a document from my own coroner that says somebody dies. I have to have something. The code says from the Department of Health or from a printed newspaper obituary, and so it creates this. So there are just things like that that are really old that they need to update. And we also have an old process for. We still have a process of transferring voters. So the idea was back in the horse and buggy days, if you moved from Allentown to Mercer County, we had to transfer you because I had to get your paperwork from Lehigh County sent to me here in Mercer County. Well, now it's all online, but we still have this paper horse and buggy process of I have to request that Lehigh County release you. And in every other state in the country, it's just called a change. It's just a change of address. And I should be able to just re-register you immediately. And instead, we have this very clunky process that just dates back to horses and buggies, which is awesome. So, which we still have, by the way, in Mercer County. So, all Amish people do not live in Lancaster; they're all over the state. And so, I have to, we serve a very diverse population. People don't often who live outside of Pennsylvania don't realize that, there's Amish people and all of that everywhere.
Yeah, we also have, I say we, once a Pennsylvanian, always a Pennsylvanian, but
Sure.
I've taken to heart what you're saying because I am a Maryland voter now, and it is
Right.
wildly different. We had an episode with one of your counterparts from a county in Wisconsin who talked about horses as well. I'll just leave it there. Folks can watch that episode. Um, Good stuff to unpackage there.
Sure.
We're going to pivot in a moment to maybe some unfortunate topics about conspiracies and myths and disinformation out there. But another debate that's percolating in Harrisburg and elsewhere
Mhm.
is open primaries. Some call them semi-open primaries, but it gets
Sure.
to independents voting.
Sure.
And 2025 is an election year, and this is another
Right.
reason I was excited to sit down with you. There's always
Mhm.
elections in Pennsylvania. There's no on or off
There are.
years,
Right.
and primaries in some instances in some counties really are outcome determinative. So, would be really curious your thoughts on this debate.
Sure. So first of all, just so people can understand, in Pennsylvania, every even numbered year, we have federal races on the ballot and we have statewide races on the ballot. So, for instance, next year, the governor's race will be on the ballot and the attorney general. And then we'll have U.S. House races. And that's also when we would have a U.S. Senate race if there was one that we were, uh, uh, if there was one on the ballot. In every odd year, we elect municipal people. And Pennsylvania is a commonwealth. So I do not have, so if you live in a state that has unincorporated county land, so for instance, I grew up in Georgia where we had a small number of cities, but then you just had land that was run by the county. We have none of that. In Pennsylvania, every bit of land is covered by a township, borough, or city. So I have 47 townships, boroughs, and cities. We also have an inordinate number of school districts. So in
So
an
it's like
odd
every
number
five
year,
minutes you're in a different jurisdiction.
yeah, and you literally are. And so, in this fall, I'll be running 14 school district elections, 47 municipal elections, in addition to retention races for state um, appellate judges, and then we'll be running. Some counties have Commonwealth, or I'm sorry, they have county judges on the ballots and things like that. So it's our odd year elections are actually worse in many respects to administer than even number elections because we have to deal with the candidates and the filings and all that for those people. So I just want to give a little bit of context. And so, like what you were saying about having open primaries, there's a couple of things I think that are important to keep in mind. One is that even in even year elections and the general election, we do not have super high turnout among people who are unaffiliated. So basically, if you think about it, you have three kinds of people. You know, um, you have people who are affiliated with two of the major parties. Then we do have two. We have a minor party. We have the Libertarians, and we've had Green Party people. And then we have people they're basically unaffiliated. Um, and so in my county, for instance, about 60% of the county is Republican, about 40% is Democratic. So there's a 10,000 voter gap between the Republicans and the Democrats in registered voters. And then I have about 10,000 people who are unaffiliated. Um, in general, the argument that gets made, and there's actually a court case that's been filed, with the state Supreme Court here that says that people who are unaffiliated should be able to vote in these primaries. And so there's a couple of issues that just come from that. So one is who gets to vote in a primary? So is it just the people who are unaffiliated, or do you let it just be an open primary? So for instance, in Georgia, they have wide open primaries. You can vote in either primary. They don't keep track of who's a Democrat or who's a Republican in their voter registration system. And then when I was living in Utah, they had they had semi-closed primaries, so you couldn't, like, Republicans wouldn't let you vote in their primary, but Democrats would let you vote in their primary if you were unaffiliated. So it was this interesting process. So I think that, the process is, there's a lot of different types of open primaries, and that's not really being discussed. The other point though I would make though is the people are arguing in the case, they're saying, well, if I want to have my voice heard, I have to, the decision is being made in the primary election. And when those people, if they were, so in my county, if you wanted to vote and make a difference in much of the county, you would want to vote in the Republican primary. And so those people are going to have to go into a polling place and they're going to affiliate with the Republican Party for the day. That's going to be noted in their voter history and all of that. And so they're going to get mail from the Republican Party from there on out for, what they're doing. And so, in general, those people should just, if you're one of the people who lives in a county that's a majority one party or the other, you should just affiliate with that party. And that's kind of like how our board, views this issue, like my board of elections, is that you want to be a member of a party and you want to vote in their primary, just affiliate with them. It's not that complicated. You're affiliating with them on election day. There's no reason why you just can't be affiliated with them otherwise. Or, if if you're unaffiliated, you can affiliate prior to election day, and then you can unaffiliate right after election day. You can do it through the voter registration process. And so in general, that's just you already have to affiliate. Why not just do it through the current process we have? That's the way our county views it.
Well, I appreciate that perspective. I'm sure the audience
Sure.
does too. Okay, I want to pivot as we wind down to, I used the term before, unfortunate, but a topic that certainly is still on the minds of a lot of Arizonans. It's on the minds of a lot of
Sure.
Pennsylvanians. It's been
Right.
very much in a court of law. It's been a court of public
Mhm.
opinion. There's a
Sure.
lot still percolating from the 2020 election and subsequent elections about these
Mhm.
themes. So don't want to dwell
Sure.
on a negative, but
Yeah.
what are you hearing as some of the kind of frequently asked questions, um, be them from constituents with preconceived notions or just genuine
Sure.
concerns of how the
Right.
county, what safeguards and um, this
Right.
and for that matter, I mean, is this dissipated at all, or do you think that this is still kind of there in the body politic of Mercer County and the greater region?
Sure. Well, I think that people do have concerns about, hold on. People have had concerns about elections for a long time. And so if you go back to 2004, for instance, there were people who were convinced that the elections in the state of Ohio were rigged against John Kerry. Okay. And so in that case, there were very liberal people who were convinced that the election was rigged and that Kerry should have won Ohio, but the voting machines were in the state were rigged because there was this question about the voting machines. Um, and um, and so we've had these conspiracy theories around for a long time. And so, and before that, there were conspiracy theories about, back in 1960 about the race between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, and did dead people vote in Chicago, and all sorts of stuff. So we live in a country where there have always been these kind of concerns about elections. They were ramped up in 2020. And I think a lot of that is just because of the proliferation of social media, the internet, cable news, and all of that discussing these issues. And one of the things that we find is that and so in Mercer County, we do have people who have concern about the election process. And the thing that we try to do is to pull those people into the process and show them how we handle our elections. We show them so we have a chain of custody process to make sure that nothing can happen to our machines through the election. Post-election, we do a hand count. So we hand select precincts post-election, and we're required by statute to count 2% of the ballots from the election. So, but that can be a pretty small number of ballots, relatively speaking. So we try to always count about 5% of the ballots, and we have the political parties select precincts. And then what we'll also do is we'll select precincts that we think are potentially either competitive or there's some sort of close contests that we want to make sure that the results are accurate. So, for instance, we had a township election in the primary that was on the Republican side that was very contentious. And so we hand counted all of the ballots from that precinct, both their mail ballots and their election day ballots, so that people could see that the results were accurate. And, and I think people appreciate the fact that we go out of our way to make sure that we involve both Democrats and Republicans throughout that process. So when we canvass our mail ballots, we have one Democrat and one Republican review every ballot before we open it. And then we do our post-election audit. We have teams of Democrats and Republicans hand counting the ballots. And so no one can say, well, one party or the other has some sort of advantage, and they can see that we're being very transparent in what we're doing. And I think by having that sort of transparency, it really adds a lot to building people's confidence. And the other thing too in Pennsylvania is, like I said before, we are required to have a polling place in every township, borough, and city. So I have a polling place in a town. I have polling places in townships that have 1,500 registered voters, and I have polling places in boroughs that have fewer than 100 registered voters. Okay, but in both of those cases, the people who are counting the ballots, who are running the polls and making sure everything works correctly, those people are from those communities. So when you go into a polling place in, Jefferson Township, which is one of my largest polling places, the people who live there, when they go in, they're seeing 6 people that they know from their township running the elections. And I think that also adds confidence to it because they know those people who are running the process. And so, there are conspiracies about elections. And if you watch too much cable news, you will hear every conspiracy in the world about the elections. And, but the fact is that, elections are run by local people from our community. And, and we go out of our way to involve both political parties in everything that we do so that we can make sure that everybody is confident in the process.
Well, thank you for doing that work, the kind of proactive messaging and inviting
Sure.
community members in. Is this something you
Mhm.
get the sense adjacent counties and elsewhere in Pennsylvania are there kind of best practices to combat and proactively try to douse this wildfire? I mean, are you talking internally with your counterparts, or is it kind of every county for his or her own?
No, so we have 2 associations in Pennsylvania for election directors. So we have an Eastern and a Western association. Um, and I'm actually the president of the Western Association. And so we meet twice a year, and then we have an annual conference where the entire state meets. And at those meetings, we go over best practices of how different people handle different processes and procedures so that we can have some, not uniformity, but we're all aware of how, how we do things, and we can draw on each other's practices. And so I learn things from my counterparts and they learn things from me. And I think that makes a big difference in how we do things. So I know a lot of the counties around me, they do very similar, hand counts, or they do very similar processes to reach out to their political parties to try to get them involved. And I think it's very beneficial for all of us, that we have a very good group of election directors in Pennsylvania, and we're all working very hard to make sure that people can be confident in the process.
Okay, so last question. We call this show
Mhm.
Keepers of the Republic. It's an
Sure,
homage to what Ben Franklin, a native son of Pennsylvania, said many, many
sure.
moons ago. A
Hmm.
republic, if you, everyday
Right.
Americans can keep it. We think you, that are a keeper of the Republic, doing this
Sure.
important work. We think that
Hmm.
free and fair elections are a backbone of a constitutional republic. That being
Hmm.
said, we're approaching the 250th birthday. There'll be a lot
Hmm.
happening in Pennsylvania. Just, I'd be curious what, if anything, Mercer County is doing to mark the 250th and hopefully to bring county residents together about these themes.
Oh, sure. So we have a PA 250 committee here, and our commissioners are very involved in that process. And they're doing a lot to be prepared for next year and what they do. Mercer County was created largely based upon people who fought in the Revolutionary War being given land grants out here. And if you think about it, it's kind of we don't think about how scary that would be. The fact that you're you're being given this land in the middle of nowhere. There's not a lot of, there wasn't any infrastructure or anything like that. And, so we have,
Because you could
um,
take a horse over a day and a half up to Lake Erie, I guess. But
yeah, it's a long way. And so, we're very fortunate to we were founded as a county in 1803. And so we'll be doing quite a lot to bring people together next year around these issues. And hopefully we'll be doing it in an election year where we'll have a good process, but also hopefully we'll have some reforms in place if the legislature, can do that for us to make sure that we can have people vote in a much better and more modern way. Because, and like I said, in many respects, we're still, voting as we did in Pennsylvania 150. And so it'd be great if we could, catch everybody up to the 21st century.
here, here. Well, thank you so much for your time and great perspective.
Thank you so much. I appreciate doing this, and thank you very much.
If you like this episode, please share it on social media and tell your friends. It's the best way for folks to find out about us. If you want to learn more about how you can help keep our republic, stop on over to our website, keepourrepublic.org. Thanks so much for joining us to learn more about the safeguards in running our nation's elections.